Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Christine and you're watching Life in Notions. This month marks the 1-year anniversary since Tim and I completely decluttered and reorganised our entire home following the KonMari Method. In this video, I'll share with you my personal experience of going through the process, the results which we achieved, and how we've maintained our home in the year since. The KonMari Method is the name of the decluttering and organising method developed by Japanese organiser Marie Kondo in her book The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. I stumbled across the life-changing magic of tidying up purely by accident. I was looking for an audiobook to listen to because I had in mind to clean my house that day, and I came across the title and thought it sounded interesting. I knew nothing about the book and had never heard of the KonMari Method. I stuck it on, and 5 hours later I had listened to the whole thing in one go whilst cleaning my house, and I was ready to get started. And get started we did, because when Tim got home from work that evening, we began the process straight away. The premise of the KonMari Method is super simple. It all revolves around one simple question: does it spark joy? The ultimate goal is to surround yourself with the things that you love, which reflect the lifestyle you desire. Marie Kondo is very specific in the order in which you should tackle decluttering and organising your belongings. She suggests breaking up your belongings into 5 main categories. These are clothing, books, papers, miscellaneous items, otherwise referred to in the book as komono, and finally sentimental items. So rather than going through your home room by room, you do this category by category. And instead of focusing on the negative, the things that you don't want to have in your home, you're looking for the positives, the things that you really love. Then you discard the rest. When you tackle a category, you have to pull out every single item that falls within that criteria. And that way you are faced with the actual reality of how much you own of a particular type of item. The order in which you tackle your belongings is important. You start with clothes because most people are the least attached to their clothes of all the different categories, and that's because clothes come in and out of our lives all the time. We're used to them wearing out, not fitting anymore, going out of fashion, or whatever it may be. On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum are sentimental items, and people can have a really difficult time letting go of things which they associate with memories of loved ones. If you follow the order of the categories suggested in the book, you should be able to finely tune your decision-making skills and learn to trust your own judgment, so that as you go through the process, you become more and more adept at making good decisions on what to keep and what to discard, so that by the time you reach the sentimental items category, you aren't having too much trouble making good choices. So to begin, Tim and I decided to tackle his clothes, but here's the thing: when you go through the KonMari Method, it's important to understand you are only supposed to make decisions on your own belongings, not someone else's. So whilst I was there for moral support, it was Tim doing all the work. I helped him get all of the clothes and shoes and boots and coats and everything together, but he was the one that had to handle each and every item and make the decision, asking himself all the time if it sparked joy. At the end of the process, we were left with a big pile of clothes he didn't wish to keep, and lots of clothes that did spark joy and which were in good condition and were comfortable to wear. We discarded and donated all the clothes that Tim didn't wish to keep, and everything else was reorganised properly in the wardrobes and drawer space available in our bedroom. Marie Kondo suggests that you hang your clothes in a very specific way, with longer, heavier items on the left, gradually rising to shorter, lighter items on the right. The idea is that this arc is psychologically uplifting, so that every time you open your wardrobe doors and are faced with your clothes, it will lift your spirits. The next day I tackled my own clothes, and it was a totally different story. I couldn't get over how many clothes I actually had. I had been in complete denial. However, I was surrounding myself with all these clothes and picking up item after item, and I couldn't get started. When I'd been with Tim the night before and he'd been going through his clothes, he had made it look so easy. He was able to make snap judgments straight away on whether or not something sparked joy for him. But when it was my turn, I found it near impossible to conjure up any sort of emotion towards my clothes. Eventually, I had a light bulb moment when I was handling one of my absolute favourite tops, and I realised that holding that item and looking at it made me happy. It made me feel uplifted, and that was the feeling I was looking for. After that, it was pretty much plain sailing, and I managed to go through all my wardrobe within 2 hours. At the end of it, I had quite a startling revelation. I hadn't really been aware consciously that I had been hanging on to relics of my past life. I had an enormous amount of formal office wear left over from the years when I had worked in an office environment. But at the time of doing the KonMari Method, it had been 4 years since I gave up that lifestyle in favour of working from home for myself. I no longer had any need for these clothes, and yet I'd been hanging on to them because in the back of my mind I kept thinking I might need them one day, and they were expensive and they were good quality, and I had liked wearing them at the time. But the truth is, they were part of my past life, not part of my present life, and I let them go, and I'm so glad that I did. Yes, I did get rid of a lot of clothes, but what I was left with were clothes which fit me well, were comfortable, good condition, and they made me happy. I discarded everything else. Now, if you're thinking of going through this process and you have the fear that you're going to end up with nothing at the end of it, put those fears aside. Because really, what is the difference between having just a handful of clothes you genuinely enjoy wearing and a wardrobe full of things but nothing to wear? Well, nowadays I have slowly built up my wardrobe again, piece by piece, very carefully picking and choosing what I wanted as and when I needed them. Nowadays, when I open my wardrobe each morning, I have no trouble finding things to wear because I love all my clothes. This is a far cry from how I used to live. Prior to doing the KonMari Method, Tim and I each had so many clothes that each of us had an enormous wardrobe of our own. In fact, my clothes couldn't even be stored in a wardrobe in our bedroom because there wasn't the space. So my clothes were actually stored in a wardrobe in a different room. Having gone through our clothes, however, Tim and I were actually able to amalgamate both of our wardrobes into one wardrobe, like normal people, and we had room to spare. The second category is books. And books was the one category that Tim was absolutely dreading, and that's because he's been collecting books most of his life. Myself, on the other hand, I tend to be more of a Kindle reader, so I really didn't have that many books to go through. I still managed to get rid of a few things, but when it came to Tim's turn, I remember that evening he wasn't feeling terribly well, and he sat at the kitchen table whilst I ran around the entire house lugging enormous armfuls of books back and forth to him. He sat at the table and picked up each and every book, asking himself if it sparked joy. In the end, Tim was surprisingly able to let go of over 300 books which did not spark joy. The wonderful thing about having brought all of our books into one space to be sorted was that as Tim was deciding whether or not to keep a book, I was putting them into piles and sorting them according to subject, author, etc. So it actually meant that at the end of the night, when we put all the books back, they were organised and properly displayed for the first time ever. The third category was papers, and for me this was definitely the most challenging and least fun chore of all. We had papers all over the house in random piles, in boxes, in bags, in drawers, in the attic, everywhere. And it took a long time just to get them all together in the first place. And once we did, it was staggering the amount of paperwork that we had. Then, of course, Tim and I had to spend a lot of time reading each and every single piece of paper to see whether it was important enough to keep or whether it should be recycled or it needed to be shredded. This was an extremely time-consuming task, but I'm so glad that we did it, because before we couldn't find anything. Now we've kept only the absolute necessary papers and we've gone digital for everything else. We have digital banking, most of our manuals are available online, and so on. Nowadays we just have one filing drawer in the desk in the study and a cupboard specifically dedicated to box files for other paperwork. Everything else gets shredded or recycled immediately. Commono is the term given to encompass every other category you can think of in your home that doesn't fall under clothing, books, papers, or sentimental items. A lot of people seem to struggle with this because it's so vague. But here's what I did. I got out my bullet journal and I wrote down a list of different subcategories that I thought would make sense to me, and I ticked them off as I went. The first subcategory I decided to tackle was my kitchen. I decided to tackle the entire kitchen in one go as one subcategory because there wasn't too much to do in there. I had already decluttered my kitchen not long before, and it needed a little bit of tweaking here and there with the organising, but it wasn't too bad. So I was able to do that in just a couple of hours. I pulled everything out and handled each and every item, asking myself, did it function well? Did it spark joy? Was it the best? When I had multiple utensils, I would compare them to each other, and actually I discovered that I had definite favourite products. Even if I had a whole selection of utensils, I kept reaching for the same few over and over again and never using the others. So those were the ones that I discarded. The next subcategory was electricals. Now this was a hotbed of contention between Tim and myself because I saw all these random boxes of cables as clutter, whereas Tim was of the firm view that they might be useful someday and we should hold on to them forever. We argued about this back and forth, but in the end we reached a compromise. We agreed that we would keep one or two of each type of different lead or cable, even though we didn't really know what they were for, and we got rid of everything else. And we had boxes and boxes full. I'm talking about large packing style boxes full. So we got rid of tons of stuff and made loads of space, and where possible we have since tried to identify and label all the cables so that we know what they're for, and now we know where they all are, when and if we ever need them. Then I moved on to various other categories such as health and beauty, pet products, cleaning products, towels and bedding, hobbies. Hobbies was a really big one. Tim is into board games and I'm into arts and crafts, and each of us has a designated space in the house for our hobbies. So Tim did the board games, I did the crafts room, and I have to admit, when we both tackled our hobbies individually, neither of us really purged that many items, but it was a fantastic opportunity to take everything out the drawers and off the shelves, see exactly what I had, and to be honest, it was kind of like Christmas because I rediscovered so many things that I'd sort of forgotten that I had. And then I got to reorganize everything, and this time I did it really bearing in mind that I didn't want to be faced with overwhelming visual clutter, and what I ended up with was a far superior organisation system in my craft room. Tim didn't organise his games quite as thoroughly as I had expected. He went more for the sort of shove it on a shelf if it fits kind of approach. However, months later we did do the board games room again, and this time I gave him a hand, and we've actually got a video showing exactly how we did it from start to finish. And you'll see at the end of that room is now supremely well organised and it works really well. I was inspired as I went through this process to finish off a couple of organisational projects that I'd started earlier in the year and never quite got round to finishing, and that was due to work schedules or whatever. One of those things was that I had in mind to design and build a mudroom hutch. The mudroom is the main entryway into and out of our house, but before we did the KonMari method, we had stuck with the tradition of the previous owners of using the understairs cupboard as the space to offer to our guests to hang up their coats and jackets and to take off their boots and shoes when they visited. However, it was also the only available space to me to store my vacuum cleaner and my mops and brooms. So it was sort of a dual function area, and I really didn't want that. I wanted everything to have a very clear and defined purpose. As Marie Kondo says in her book, not only do you want to select the things that make you happy and work the best and serve you well, you need to make sure that every item has a home. So I decided to proceed with finishing the project that I had started with the mudroom hutch, and I had a brainwave as I went through the pet products subcategory. After going through all of the dog products in particular, I realised that there was still a lot of things that we were going to be hanging on to that we loved and that we needed and that worked really well. And I thought, why not build a small storage area behind the mudroom hutch to hang a rail running the whole length of the unit from which to hang S-hooks and to hang all of our leads and collars and harnesses and things for the dogs. And that's exactly what I did, and it has made such a difference. Now you can just go into the mudroom, open the door to reveal the rail of all the leads and collars and pick out exactly what you want. Having completed the mudroom hutch, I was then able to offer that space to our guests as they entered our home to sit down and take their boots and shoes off and to hang up their coats and jackets, which meant that I now had a cupboard under the stairs solely dedicated to my cleaning supplies. So that cupboard now had a very clear function. I do have stashes of cleaning supplies around the house where I think it's sensible to keep the things that I use for certain areas. For example, in the upstairs bathroom, I keep a small storage bin of just the products I use for upstairs. Again, under the sink in the kitchen, I have some cleaning supplies and so on. But the bulk of the cleaning supplies are now stored under the stairs. And the mudroom hutch is where we store all the pet products, and people are able to store their shoes and boots, coats and jackets. It all works really, really well because now everything has a clearly defined purpose and everything has a home. When it came to tackling the sentimental category, I had very little to deal with apart from photos. Photography is one of my biggest passions, and I had started my hobby of photography a very long time ago, back in the day before digital cameras, and I had a lot of albums of printed photographs as well as some boxes full of loose photographs that had never been sorted. I had to go through every single one of my pictures and ask myself, did they spark joy? And if they didn't, for the first time in my life, I actually felt able to let them go. I binned hundreds of photos which before would have been utterly unthinkable, but for some reason I'd even been hanging on to, not in albums of course, but I had hung on to super blurry photos or photos of people I didn't even remember the names of, or places that weren't at all interesting, and I got rid of all of those. Instead, I focused on all the ones of the great memories and the wonderful people in my life, and I now have a finely curated collection of photos that makes me super happy to look at. So in case you're wondering, this entire process took Tim and I 10 days. We spent every spare moment, every evening and every weekend going through this process until it was done. We watched no TV, we had quick meals, we had late nights, not a lot of sleep and early mornings, but we got through it all in 10 days. And at the end of that period, our entire home was transformed. One thing that we did that really helped us keep going through this process, no matter how exhausted we were, was we would bag and box up all of the items to be taken out of the house and put them in the garage overnight. The next day, they would be taken away and gotten rid of, never to come back into our lives again. The worst thing that you could do, in my experience, is to allow things to pile up and think you'll deal with them at the end. Think that you'll deal with them later, because as a lot of us know, later often really means never, and there's a danger those things will come crawling back into your house one day and you won't have got rid of your clutter at all. So what we did as we tackled every single category, we would always reorganize all the things we decided to keep and put them away before we went to bed that night. That meant we never had a house full of mess except for the hours where we were actually spending the time going through the items. So if I'm making the method sound like it's hard work, that's because it is. It is hard work, and you do have to be intensely focused on what you're doing, but it is so well worth the effort. It's now been 1 year since we completely decluttered and reorganized all of our things, and life has been so good ever since. Nowadays, we can walk into any room in the house, open any drawer, any cupboard, and everything is tidy, organized, in its place. And they're all things that we love, that work well and make us happy. And life really doesn't get much better than that. When you're starting out on the KonMari process, Marie Kondo tells you to be very clear in your mind on what your ultimate goal is. Why are you doing this? And what do you hope to achieve? For me personally, I wanted a home that was calm, peaceful, genuinely tidy, genuinely organised, and I really wanted that sense of airiness and space. So once we completed the KonMari method, we entered what I would call maintenance mode. Now let's face it, once you've finished decluttering your home, it's not as if you're going to stop purchasing things. We are all constantly buying things and bringing them into our lives and into our homes. The difference between before we did the KonMari method and now is that Tim and I are very conscientious about the purchases that we will make. We have raised the standard of the sorts of items that we will bring into our home to such a degree that we will no longer compromise or settle for second best. Now we will only bring into our home the things which absolutely meet our requirements and which spark joy. Before I'd even started the KonMari method, for a long time I had developed daily cleaning routines and detailed cleaning routines. The only thing is I hadn't really got into the nitty-gritty of sorting and organising everything properly before we did the method. Now that we have less things, it is so much easier and quicker for me to keep our home clean and tidy. We're also in the habit of always putting things back after we use them, and that helps tremendously. Now it's super easy to do because everything has a designated spot in our home. Having dealt with all the minutiae, all the stuff, all the things on our house, we have regained control of our home and our possessions, and that's extremely empowering. It's led us to be able to deal with long-term big home improvement projects that we simply didn't feel able to cope with previously. So in the last few months, we've already ticked off several big projects. We've done the roof, we've done the garage roof, we've done the external walls, we've put in an entirely new heating and hot water system, and we started to redecorate some of the house as well. In the future, we will have far more projects to deal with, and I'll try and film them as and when they come up. But just to give you a taster, for the last few days I have been studying my heart out all about Venetian plastering techniques because I have a really cool project in mind, and I hope to get it done in the not too distant future. I hope you found this video interesting, and if you enjoyed it, please do give it a thumbs up. It lets us know you enjoy this kind of video, and if you haven't already and you'd like to, please do subscribe. We would love to have you. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in our next video.